Welcome to Intelligent Think, the podcast in which we explore what makes ideas great, how we can make our thinking better, and why it's so important that we share our ideas with the world. Plus, we'll be talking to thought leaders and authors about their own experiences so you can mine them for gold nuggets along the way. I'm Verity Craft.
And I'm Christina Wedgwood.
And this is Intelligent Think. You completely forgot that you were going to need to do that, Hazy.
Oh, I was there.
Okay. And today we're doing things a little bit differently because it's not just us. We've got the whole Intelligent Inc team here because we are going to have a discussion about AI and our stance on AI. We started having it a few days ago, and then I went, actually, this would be a really interesting podcast episode. So I forced everyone to stop talking and set up another time to do it. So before we dive in, I would love the rest of the team to introduce themselves. Elsa, do you want to kick us off with a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Elsa Klein. Part of the Intelligent Inc team. Happy to be here. Came to Intelligent Inc about 3 years ago, and by my accent, you can probably tell I'm the only non-Kiwi on the team. Originally from Des Moines, Iowa. Transplant here in New Zealand, and now, ironically, we're working all over the world. So, a little bit everywhere. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. How about you, Dave?
Kia ora everyone, Dave Taylor. I am one of the strategic thinkers and storytellers here, been with the team for about 5 years with a specialty from my background in things like poetry and creative writing, so able to lend some of those skills to make content really sing.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, C and I are pretty lucky to have you both, so we're excited for you to come on the podcast as well. So today we wanted to give a bit of kind of an inside look at how we explore topics in our team. I think that we tend to approach decisions and approaches to, our philosophies in a really collaborative way, and it's one of the things that I think makes us really great. So we wanted to lift the curtain a bit. So we're just going to dive in and have a conversation, and hopefully ignore the fact that that we're recording this for the podcast. So today the question is, really, what is the Intelligent Inc stance on AI? So we know that, there's a lot of AI out there. It's now in everything, for better or worse. And that there's a lot of people saying, basically, if you don't pick up and use AI, you are going to be left behind. But we also know that there's some drawbacks. So that's the question on the table today, is we want to try to figure out what is our stance on AI. Dave, you kind of brought this question to the table originally. What prompted that, and where do you hope we can get to today?
Great question. If I remember rightly, it started because we were talking about how we work with people who are writing their own books. And we know, as you say, that people are going to be using AI more and more. It's a matter of what do we feel is the best approach for using AI. And we started having slightly diverging opinions, because for me, coming through a creative writing program before joining the team, for me, the writing is a chance to improve your skills as a writer. But for others, there is a matter of, well, it's more important to get the book as the final product. So how much emphasis do you put on outsourcing your thinking, and how much do you want to emphasize your own development as a writer throughout that process? And I'd also want to stress, it's not about, you can outsource copy editing or proofing. That absolutely makes sense. And you can outsource, I suppose, to a certain extent, the idea generation, maybe if you're talking and negotiating with someone. But what's our approach and what's going to resonate with the people that we work with, I think, are two sub-questions that need to also be addressed in this conversation.
Mm.
So what is our feeling? Do we want to talk a little bit about how people could be using AI to write their books, write their material?
I think where we got to was, there's a naivety to thinking that, we could just ignore it and that no one's going to use it. So I think what's helpful is thinking about
people are going to use it. Like, it's integrated into tools that we're using AI indirectly, and a lot of people are using it directly too. So I think, pragmatically, there's maybe a few steers that we could give people around where it is of maximum benefit and where the pitfalls lie. So it's going to become part of the writing process, and the book writing process in particular, but where is it more helpful, and where do those shortcuts sort of do us a disservice or do authors a disservice? I think we've by default sort of got a bit of a reputation so far of being not necessarily anti-AI, but definitely pro-human and human first, because I totally unrelated to this conversation, but it was serendipitous timing. I posted something about AI this morning, and I've just seen that one of our new clients has commented on it. Exact reason why I chose Intelligent Ink, because they believe in the writing process. I actually had another publishing company tell me, just do it in ChatGPT or AI. That is why I let them go and hired you, because you're the real deal. So already it's interesting to see that the market perceives us a particular way about AI, even if maybe internally we still think that we're figuring out what we think about it.
Probably because we've put so many posts up about AI already before we really worked out what we thought.
And this particular one, to put it in context, was saying that it's a mistake to outsource most writing to AI, because even if it can produce something that's accurate and engaging, we lose something valuable in the process of doing that, because writing is where we do our best thinking, is an abridged version of what this particular image that I shared was saying.
See, I agree with that. I think as well that you lose the personal development that you get along the way. Typically, when we're talking to people, we're saying, look, writing a book is a year-long journey. We think that's pretty realistic for writing a good book. We know that there are get it done in 30-day, 90-day programs. They have their place. But for us, when we're talking about developing our thinking, that's the priority we put on it. It's going to take you a while, and you are going to be a different person at the other end of it. What's the role then in AI in terms of shortcutting that? Elsa, you started something.
I think this is actually the center of the question: is what's the real benefit of a book, and does AI get in the way of that? I think we know, we've all written books, we've seen dozens of people go through this process, we've seen the benefit of what writing does to your thinking and to your development, to the ideation of your ideas. You actually build a better business, you build a better communication strategy through the process of writing, and so why would you shortcut that? That's half of the whole point. Whereas I think a lot of people come to writing a book saying, well, I want this thing with my name on it so that I can use it as a tool and so that I can get my ideas out there. They don't see the benefit of the journey to get there. And so I think that's for me what this conversation is really about, is can you still develop your thinking in a meaningful way with AI and get the outcome that you're looking for? Or does it actually shortcut the process and you lose out on the benefits of a great book and the benefits of all of the thinking that it took to get there?
That's such a good point, because I think sometimes, I would say one of our downsides or one of our weaknesses is that we have a tendency to just expect people to sit in the difficulty of writing a book, because we do. If we're ghostwriting for a client, that's still a really hard process. We work through everything. We take our time. We make sure that the thinking's really good on the client end, that we've communicated it really well. And see, when you were writing your book, it wasn't necessarily an enjoyable process a lot of the time. No, but I think while we know the benefits of doing that, and we know that it's this incredible professional and personal development, a lot of people don't want the pain, because they've already got enough pain in other parts of their life. They're already running a business, they're already they've got a family, they've already got lots of things. And I think that it's where do we find that balance between like making it a bit easier for people, because it kind of needs to be, especially if, to be honest, we're going to sell more people on it. It kind of needs to be a bit easier, but also, as you say, Elsa, like not losing the thing that is really cool about the book process, which is the development. And like you said, Dave, like them being in a really different state, or like being a different person at the end of the process. We see how much confidence that gives people. We see how much, more just steady they are in their ideas, and how much more willing they are to put them out there because they've been through that process. So how do we kind of take the good parts of AI in terms of speeding things up, making it easier without losing that benefit?
Verity, would it be helpful? Because I think we've all seen a lot of examples of where AI is not working. Would it be helpful to maybe start there with like, here's a case study of how it clearly has been a disaster. And then we can sort of say, okay, well, if it's not that, then what is the practical use? Like, would that be helpful maybe to start there?
100%. Okay. And I feel like you've got an example. I know exactly which one.
So I guess the story I'll share is, we've gotten a few books in recently, not just one, actually quite a few, at the editing stage. And there's one in particular that stood out to me because, well, it was the first time I had seen a completed manuscript come in from a person that we're working with, and pages upon pages of it were AI generated. And, I knew this not only because the tone dramatically shifted, but what would happen is that I was reading the book, and I'd be like, yep, this is great examples. I can really feel this person talking to me. And then I'd read more and more, and all of a sudden I'd be like, wait, I'm not paying attention anymore. What am I reading? And I'd have to go back a few pages, and then I'd lose it again. It was like your brain goes to mush. And then I realized I was reading AI. I was reading a whole lot of nothingness that wasn't actually saying anything, but it was packaged so perfectly that you almost lose yourself in it anyway. And then I started zooming out as I was editing this book, and I realized the whole structure of the book didn't make any sense. It was a really technical, very niche industry, and there were chapters in there about marketing and business side of things that the author wasn't expert in at all. And I started to realize, I put it together, that I think they had gone to ChatGPT and said, I'm writing a book about this technical industry. What should my chapters be? What does somebody need to know? And they had actually formulated the whole concept and structure of the book based on things that didn't actually come from them. And that led them down this path that was so far removed from what they actually had to give. They had a doctorate, really, really expert. And the chapters that were about the things that they were passionate about, you could tell so clearly that they had written it themselves. And it was really great. It was really interesting to read. And the AI sort of sucked all of that out. And so what ended up happening is, edited the book, gave lots of feedback, and then they ended up needing to go back, rewrite most of the text. And it ended up, being quite detrimental to their whole plan, because they had to push out the launch of their book. Ended up, costing them way more time, way more effort, probably going to be more budget as well to get this across the line. And so I think the big don't do this learning from that experience isn't just the AI generative text, but it's actually where do you start with your idea, and don't go to AI to say, what should my book say? Because that's immediately going to steer you to the most generic answers, to the, average of the averages, rather than starting with thought leadership, starting with what needs to be told that's not being said right now. And I think a lot of people are using AI in those early stages. They're like, oh, wealth of knowledge, I should definitely go to those for the strategy. But what ends up happening is the complete opposite. So that's definitely the one on the top of my mind. I'm sure there's lots of other examples you guys have.
I was going to say, it's not a what's gone wrong, but actually if I can contrast that with one that I do think has worked quite well, is I just got a new lead for some editing where he's used AI, but he came up with the structure of the book. I've only had a very quick squiz through because I was basically just quoting. but like his first chapter is all a personal story and it all feels like him, and then the rest of it still does feel like him. And he said that he's used AI, but the difference is that he came up with the whole structure and all that sort of stuff. I'm not actually sure what the structure looks like because I haven't read it well enough yet, but he came up with that. He came up with all the ideas. He came up with that initial story, and then he had a whole heap of content that he'd already written that he asked AI to basically put into that, and then he's just kind of edited it from there. So I'm like, that's where the difference is, I think, is like it's still, he's done the thinking, he's figured out what the reader needs, he's figured out kind of where he needs to take it, what expertise he has, and all he's done is use AI to kind of speed up the process of pulling from his own stuff. And that's like, I think that's the difference, is it's like if you're using AI to pull from your own expertise, your own ideas, your own knowledge, your own content, it is going to give you something far closer to what it needs to be than if you are asking it to do the thinking for you. I think those are two, that's a really big distinction.
Can I share another application like that? One of our thought leadership sort of friends and another practitioner in the industry, they're working on a book, and the challenge that he had and what he sort of tried to solve with AI was creating a system to find the really good stories and quotes from a really large body of their work. So they have over 600 podcast episodes where they have talked to people about the work of thought leadership, which is what their book is about. And so he used those, he got these 600 plus podcast episodes transcribed. He said his best estimate was that they totaled around 2.5 million words.
Oh my God.
So that's when he turned to AI for help, and he said he's taught it to recognize high value segments for the book project. So he's got a sample of, he's used a sample of about 25% of them, 150 episodes, and from there is relying on it to help him identify which quotes and stories integrate best in each chapter. So I think, you know, it is not generating copy, it is merely analysing in a way that a single human's brain can't do at pace, like a huge body of his words and conversations already. I haven't seen the output of that yet, but that didn't elicit quite the same allergic reaction in me. I was like, well, that just sounds smart, right? That sounds like efficiency. And I'm not sure, given he was there, him or his colleague were there and present for all those conversations, we've listened to them already, it doesn't feel like the same kind of shortcut, like a shortcut that loses something. Yeah, I don't know. Dave, you look poised.
I am. I was struggling to unmute myself. I think in some ways, because that work feels like you could do it yourself, or you could outsource it to someone and they would return to you. This is what each of these podcasts is about. This is some of the key messages you come through. And yeah, so you could do it. It just happens to be you push it through a computer that can punch it through, I don't know how many connections, and give you the answer that you want. I do want to park for later as well the ethics of using generative AI tools in a broader sense. But that's something, you're right, it doesn't feel like it's quite so likely to break us out in hives, because it's still returning the work to this person, and they are going to ideally be the ones to make it work at the other end. It may be helpful. Go on, please.
No, I was just going to say, it doesn't feel like the same doing it for you. That it's not taking the value loaded or value intrinsic part of the work away.
That's probably it. It's doing taking care of the low hanging fruit. Like we've worked with clients in the robotic automation space or in the CRM space, where if you can outsource or automate repetitive manual tasks, why don't you? I mean, why not? It may be helpful, and apologies, as I say, I slipped out a moment ago. It may be helpful to talk about this in terms of the stages that a book goes through, from the ideation to developing the ideas, onward to the writing and then the editing and publishing. That might help give us a bit of structure for the conversation. We're sort of floating around a couple of those at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, because also, like I said it I did a presentation last week in a networking group that was kind of, what to know about book writing in 2025, basically. And because he'd asked specifically about AI, I put in a thing about AI. And because we hadn't had this discussion yet, I basically summed it up as, it's an awesome tool, just be careful how you use it. And used like that example, Elsa, that you'd given already, and talked about the fact that it's quite helpful for things like research, and maybe there's other uses like doing referencing, because we've recognized that everyone's really, really bad at that. So I think that idea of, let's actually go through the process, Dave, and figure out like, okay, well, what do we think we kind of agree with, or would recommend at each of those stages, is a really good idea. See,
what we need to create is almost like a little matrix of, we got down one side the stages of the book process, and then 2 columns of the do's and don'ts. Don't use it for this here. Do use it for this here. Just mark that up while we're talking.
I'm drawing it on my page now, and then I feel like maybe later I'll have to add in a cool Canva visual. Although someone's just shown me an AI tool called Napkin that apparently turns things into diagrams. So maybe I'll use AI to create this matrix about AI.
Verity, that's going to be your new favorite tool.
It really is.
On Saturday mornings.
I'm like, I want everything to be a visual, but I'm really, really bad at coming up with them. So yeah, I'm like, okay, this is right up my alley. All right, so let's talk the first stage. And I think we often talk about planning as one, but someone said this when I described the kind of stages the other day to somebody. They actually pointed out that what I've described as planning is actually I described as 2 pieces, which is the strategy piece first. It's like what is this book for? Who is it for? What's the core message? How are you going to get ROI? All that sort of thing. And then there's actually the planning piece, which is the book structure. And I think we often group them together, but I wonder if we should think about those as 2 separate pieces, because they kind of are 2 separate pieces.
I think you've absolutely already hit on a really interesting point, which is, if your investment in your book is, no, I just want a book out there. I want it to be a business card. I want it to get my name with an ISBN and call myself done. In that case, it's pretty easy just to morally square up and go, yeah, absolutely AI. Not that we necessarily agree with that, but we go, well, sure, why not?
It might fast track you more close to the line of that route spells out than what some of
if you want to be an author, you don't have to be, you don't have to go through a creative writing program or a business writing program or anything like that. You just, if your goal is just to get your name in print, then you can take whatever means suits you. Elsa?
I would argue that no one's goal is just to get their name in print. I would argue, if it's truly a vanity book, if it's truly, I want my name here and I want to present it, there's an element of, I also want to be proud of it. And if there's any semblance of business need, it's a reflection of your brand. And so depending on who your audience is, if they pick it up and they go, well, that's ChatGPT, that's actually going to hurt your reputation. So I would say either way, having a book that at least to you as the author feels some semblance of there's me in there and I'm proud of it, I think is important. Otherwise, what's the point if you're going to have your name in print and then shove it under your bed because it's not good?
Because it's embarrassing, right? I was going to say the same thing.
Our first matrix is basically the first row. Yeah, sure, or maybe.
Well, I also think, we've got to remember who our audience is. So we say we don't work on glorified business cards. So other people can look at whatever we put out there and go, I disagree with that. And that is fine, because those are not the people that we are trying to attract. Like, if somebody literally only cares about, I want my name on a page, or I want to use this as like a lead magnet and nothing else, fine. But they're not the people
wrong,
that we want to work with.
Fine.
Judgy McJudgy pants over here.
So we've gone through our first gate. We're going, look, you want to have pride in the work that you've achieved, right? What does it look like to use AI for the strategic element?
Yeah, this bit I haven't seen. I mean, the place where I could see us using it is actually using AI to create a bit of a like a custom GPT. I don't know if you guys have used any of those, but basically they're businesses that have created like a chat GPT that's set up with specific questions. So you put all of the knowledge and the questions and the info in, and basically it like takes the answers and then feeds up the next, like puts
Is
out
it
the
being
next one.
trained in
Yeah, so
your thinking already?
exactly. So you train it in your method basically. So like one that I have tried out was one that was like create your custom offer, which is very clearly based off the Alex Hormozy framework that is in his books, but definitely was not talking about him at all. It was saying Grand Slam offer, which I was like, again, the ethics of this, that it's clearly pulling from someone else. I'm like, I'm not so keen on that. But it was a good example of it because basically it was like, you know, it asked about the audience. And so then I put all of that stuff in, and then it was like, okay, great. Based on that, here are some more questions. So basically asked the questions and then it created the offer off the back of that. So that's where I'm like, I don't know that that's so much an author thing, but I wonder if that's an opportunity for us potentially to be like, how could we speed up or make that process easier? Right now we do that as like workshops, which are pretty cost prohibitive. Like, you know, I wonder if there's a piece of using some AI and then still having a session with people, because I think you still need the human eye over it, but potentially that's a speed up maybe.
I think there's another opportunity to be doing some market testing with AI just because they have access to so much data. You know, I'm writing a book in this genre for this audience. What are the, 10 top selling books globally? And what do they all have in common and what makes them all stand out? You know, getting access to a lot of data like that, I feel like is so helpful when you're working on the positioning of your topic. Because you want it to fit, you want to follow what people are interested in and what people are reading. Otherwise your book isn't going to sell. But at the same time, you don't want to just write something that has already been written. There's no point to that.
And that's a really common fear of authors too, is like, how do I, do I have something original to say on this, or has this topic been done? And surveying the context it sits in is interesting.
Strangely comes back to what they contribute as the author or as the thinker behind it, because their unique experience and their unique voice, as I'm sure we'll later come to, can make even the most boring, often repeated subject interesting.
Yeah. Well, I also find it like I often say to people when they're like, oh, there's already thousands of leadership books out there, and it's like, yeah, but they still sell. People still buy them. They still read them because it's a common problem. It's something that people are trying to solve. And like you look at, my best friend works for Hachette Publishing, and she always thinks it's quite funny because people are like, let's look for a totally different angle for my book, and I want to do something new. And she's like, that's not how publishers make decisions. They go, that book sold X number of copies, therefore we want another book like that so that it will sell a similar number of copies. It's like, that's because people like the same things, and
we don't like as much novelty as
we think they do. Yeah, so you're right, Dave. Like, you can have a book in a really crowded space, and it's your perspective and your thought leadership and your ideas that are what make it unique. But I love the idea, Elsa, of going, okay, well, what's the common thread between the ones that succeed, and also what is missing? Like, are there pieces? It could be even saying to ChatGPT, look at all the Amazon reviews. What do people not like about these books? Because that potentially creates some opportunities. So I think that's a really good idea of like using it to create that kind of context assessment almost.
Okay, so
there's a theory with this that I've been playing with in the last 36 minutes since we started this call, and wondering if we could test it as we go, where anything that's about analyzing or collecting, making connections externally, what is the context, what's happening out there in the world, what research exists, AI going to be super helpful and shortcut some things in a positive way. Anything internally, who am I, what do I care about, what am I trying to say, there's a lot of merit and benefit to doing that work the hard way.
Mm.
So it's a theory. It's a hypothesis at this stage. But I wonder if we could test it out as we go through these stages of the book.
Can we find any examples that run counter to that, or actually do they all fall in those two camps?
Mm.
In a really kind of cynical way, I would say that that's partly because if that information were available to the data set that the likes of ChatGPT uses, another generative AI, yeah, you could probably ask it that. But of course, it doesn't have access to that internal stuff, whether it's because it can't read your mind yet, or because you haven't got the material that you can then lean on and go, well, this is everything I've written. Help me synthesize, what are my thoughts and feelings on these matters. So you're right, it does ask you to deep dive into your own beliefs and your own philosophies, I suppose, which is quite nice, because then you can obviously set out and go, well, I want my book to do this because it speaks to me in a way that currently it can't know.
Nice. So what else do we think you could be using AI for, or you should be using AI for at that strategy stage, that deciding, whether a book's a good idea, what you want to achieve with it, who the audience is, what the message is, all that piece, what you're going to sell out the end? Are there other ways that we can see AI being really valuable there?
One that I've had some success with is looking at top 10 Amazon or bookshop books and discussing the key arguments that are made there, to be able to say, what are the key points that they're trying to make, and therefore what's the gap? Because, as you rightly say, though publishers want to know where your prospective book is going to fit on the shelves, it's also important to say, well, I'm claiming this bit because this is the gap that's not currently being addressed. If I'm arguing the same point as the other book next to it, people will just buy the book next to it. There's no sensible reason for anyone to invest in that as a publishing option. I'm addressing a gap in the market that is adjacent to other things. Well, maybe AI can help you determine that. Particularly saves you also time if you can't read 100 business books in a year. I know some people can't manage it apparently. Then you can just feed it through the system.
Yeah. I also wonder if, and like maybe it's again a tool that we can create, more of a custom one, but like I've been working on a spreadsheet that's like an ROI calculator to help people figure out like what should they be, where should they be focusing their efforts in terms of what they're driving people to out the back of their book to sell. Because what you sell out the end makes a big difference to how easy it is to get a return on your investment. And I'm almost wondering, like, for people like Christina who are allergic to spreadsheets, whether that's another thing of like, actually you could input all of that stuff and it can give you an idea of, actually, this is where you should be focusing your efforts, or this is the kind of, sales and marketing path that you should take. So, for example, okay, that you're going to want to sell more speaking gigs at the back of it. Well, how should you be thinking about using your book up ahead of time? How, if you're trying to get more leads in for a certain topic, maybe it's part of a marketing funnel. I don't know, but like I'm wondering if there's some of those pieces, because we've often said, actually, the clearer you are about that stuff up front, the easier it is to actually achieve that. When you only think about that stuff when your manuscript's done, the less likely you are to achieve that. So I wonder if there's a bit more of that stuff that, you can just weave in.
Definitely.
What wouldn't you do at this stage?
Okay, this is contentious, but I wouldn't necessarily put in a bunch of my IP and say, what do you think my topic should be?
Tell us more.
I think it feels too enticing. It's a little too dangerous. I think that I am still personally of the belief that the most interesting and the truest ideas still come from human brains. And your topic is it's such a big decision, and it should feel so you, that even if AI gives you a great idea, there's something that just feels really hollow about it. And I just worry that it leads you down paths you wouldn't have found otherwise. And I also worry that there's going to be something in the back of your head as the author that's just like, yep, AI told me to do this.
Yeah, it's an
Maybe
idea.
I'm too precious about it.
No, I think it's understandable because it sort of feels like an idea that's been bought rather than made or built.
Worked for.
Yeah, there's a similar kind of, partly a joke in the creative writing. It's the question that all authors get asked is, "Well, where do you come up with your ideas?" You know, it's quite an irritating one because they work for them. And here's a joke within that, which is someone says, "Oh, I subscribe to Ideas Monthly. It's a magazine that comes in your letterbox, and it's got oh, you can send off for this idea and claim that one as your next book." And it's kind of like that feels it feels like you haven't put all the lovely human part into it that makes that idea particularly unique. You could absolutely put them through a random idea generator. You could scramble up a dozen topics, a dozen heroes, a dozen names, doesn't really matter, and have something. And you could go, yeah, absolutely, I'll make a plot out of this. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily meaningful or contains context. You've got an objection, V.
No, I don't. I agree. I think, though, the problem is actually, the reason not to put it in and do it that way is actually different than what you guys are saying. Like, yes, I think that, you maybe are always going to feel like, oh, AI's told me that, and, it's a bit random. But I also think the problem is that the people you should be asking are not a machine. They're the people who you want to work with, who you want to read your book and have an impact. And I think that, we often get a bit scared of asking like our audience for feedback or for their input. And as a result, we then turn to things like ChatGPT and be like, what would our audience want? Well, ChatGPT is not our audience. They aren't in their brains. Like, while the machines can make educated guesses, actually we as humans don't always make obvious choices. And so I think you're far better if you're tossing up between a few topics to go out and ask the people that you want to read it what they would find most interesting or most valuable. And I think that's where it's a danger to ask ChatGPT, because we assume that it's going to give us the same answer that the actual humans would.
There's 2 points I think that relate to that to add to your point. The first of which is that ChatGPT in particular, because let's be honest, when people are talking about generative AI, they're looking at that one because it's free and very easy to access. Has been accused, ChatGPT, of becoming strangely sycophantic in the most recent updates. And you've got people saying, for example, "Oh, I've stopped taking my psychiatric medication." People are like, "I'm really ChatGPT." And ChatGPT comes back and says, "I'm so proud of you for owning that, and you're really good decision." In reality, it's a conversation to have with the medical professional, not with.
It's way more nuanced.
And I forget my second point. It'll come back to me.
That's all right. I want to move up.
I remember it.
Oh, yes, okay.
I remember it. And my second point was that the algorithms are trained by an organization. They're like Google. It's not necessarily dealing with a completely level access to information. They do have their biases. So it's possibly more likely to say, I think that's a great idea, or here's the idea that I think you should go with, which you are absolutely going to get biases with individuals out there on the street. But what you're more likely to do is get a range of them, which you aren't going to get from a single language learning model, which can only give you the average, even if it is tweaked and massaged. So there's limitations that make it, I think, better to talk to the people who are actually going to pick up your damn book and wants to read it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who's going to buy it? Not ChatGPT.
We're very agreeable as a group. I'd like to see some blood today.
I feel like we've all gotten slightly more on board with AI, but it's still pretty clear what the things we don't want to use. Okay, I want to come on to the planning stage now. So that's kind of the strategy piece. The planning piece is really about what is the journey that you're taking your reader on. And I would say, based on our experience looking at people's manuscripts that have not done their planning process with us, this is the stage that if you don't do it well, will screw you up later or will mean that you end up having to do way more editing. So this is basically the reader journey. What's that structure of your book? See?
My initial reaction is just don't at this stage. Like you're all going to have to make a frigging compelling case for me to just be like, no, stay away for this part. But also I think the other bit of that is, what does doing it well actually mean or look like? We've got an idea of what a well-planned book looks like because we do this. But I think part of it that people don't, new authors don't necessarily realize is important, and that AI is going to totally just bypass, is you have to really buy into and back your structure as well, because like it has to have been generated by you, so that the bits that hang together really well and that you're really committed to, but equally so that you're going to make I talk about doing that book plan in pencil, right? And that it's okay that it's in pencil because it will evolve and change. But you can do that when you're the one that has generated it, because you know that there was like a little bit of a niggly thing there that you're like, I'm not sure if I built that bridge properly in my plan. And so when you get to writing that bit, you're like, and it opens up that you need some more stuff or there's something that's missing there, you're like, yeah, that was my gut too. If you're just blindly following a plan that was generated for you, you don't have that same I don't know, the same relationship with it, the same freedom to move it. I don't think. And it just icks me.
I completely agree with you, Christina. I think back to sort of one of the first things we talked about today, the benefit of doing the thinking that it actually has on your business, on your practice, on your expertise. Planning contributes to that so much because you're forced to sit down. We work with so many leadership coaches and they're used to taking people on a journey in such a natural way. You get somebody in a room, you have a one-on-one conversation, you're able to throw out a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And over the course of months, you get people to a new stage. And with a book, you don't have that luxury. You can't just do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and get your reader to the end as a sane person. They're going to shut down the book if it's not organized. So you have to really dig in to what is your reader journey? How do you walk someone through a really complex idea? And that is so difficult for everyone. And if you miss out on actually doing that, not only is your book going to feel weird, but you're not going to get the benefit of actually leveling.
Is she frozen?
We lost Elsa for a second.
I think this comes back to a point that came up in a previous conversation, which is what is the responsibility, or how much should you take on to grow and develop? We mentioned it earlier, but to grow and develop as yourself as a writer, or is that a privilege to be able to take that time to develop as a writer when you have other priorities?
I think how I put it yesterday though was, I don't know of many clients who are like, I want to write a book because I want to be a better writer. But I think what they do value in the fact that they write a book is writing a book helps them articulate their ideas better. And that is part of the personal and professional development journey that we see them go on, is that, they know at the beginning that they're doing incredible work and that they've got valuable things to say. The way they've crystallized those by the end is, and the way that they can verbalize them and, write about them, worlds past.
I was going to say, I actually think it has nothing to do with becoming a better writer, because in reality, it doesn't really matter yeah, it doesn't really matter if the clients that we work with, if people who write a book, are amazing writers. Like, as long as they're, they can string some words together, fine. What matters is that they're really good at communicating their ideas. And I think that's a different skill set. And if I can come back, I agree. I don't think anybody should be using AI for this stage. And if I can give an example of why doing it yourself is so powerful. So we took a new client through this process, Elsa and I, a couple of weeks ago. And where he started thinking his book was that, he had talked to a publisher about, it was a good idea, but it was mostly just like his stories, and there wasn't really a clear reader journey. And actually, when we kind of challenged him and dove into who is the audience, who's the ideal reader, he ended up with a structure that is so different than what he had originally been thinking. And I think, based on our experience, is going to be a way better book, and B, a way more successful book, because now there's a path for it to actually get in front of lots of people and be sold, and then help him get more work and help him build a reputation. But if he had just put into ChatGPT or whatever other tools there are, this is my expertise, this is my audience, blah, 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 it probably would have just given him a regurgitation of whatever he had already put out there or put into it. The process of actually diving deep into who the audience is, what's the transformation that he wants to take them on, led us in a completely different direction. And I think the book is going to be really unique. But as we were talking about, it still sits within an echelon of other books that are similar. There's still precedent, but it's still really uniquely him. And I think what you miss out on is the ability to come up with something that is not just a regurgitation of your blogs or your podcast or whatever it is. You miss the opportunity to go, actually, what is the reader journey that I want to take them on? What's the transformation? Where are they going from and to? And what's the best way to get them there? I don't think that at this point AI can do that. So I would agree. I think actually at the planning stage, it should be all you. That's where the development comes. That's where the cool ideas come, and that's where you set off on the right path.
Right. Hit us with the other. I want to say more on that, but I'm not going to, because I think
Okay.
hit us with the other stages. So this matrix has more than 2 lines before the podcast is finished.
Let's do writing, because I think this is where most people think of using ChatGPT for it. What are the things first and foremost that we would use it for? So maybe not necessarily the generative writing, but I think there are lots of places where you could use it during the writing state, like your research that we've talked about, finding quotes and stories. What are the other things that we've already mentioned?
A guy who commented on my kind of AI related post this morning, I was really interested and a little bit confronted to hear him talk about it in this way. He says that he writes the complete thought, opinion, idea, and then copy and pastes the finished article into the AI. And from there, I ask if there's anything I may have missed. The prompt doesn't ask for improvements, just for angles I might want to consider. And he said that really helps expand his thinking. And so I asked him, does it usually bear fruit? And how often does it broaden your perspective? Because obviously that's a worthwhile thing, right? And he said, always, every time. Even if I don't agree with the output, it certainly makes me aware of other perspectives that I may not have considered. And he said, I just tested it on something I was about to post, and it gave him something to chew on. He's gone on to say what the thing was, and, but he specifically asked it, is there a perspective I may not have considered? Are there people who may think differently? And left his finishing line is, let me tell you, it didn't hold back. So, that little, why I'm challenged by that is I think the thinking partner role is a real privileged one that we get to play with clients. And I'm like, if that can do some of that challenging, that's confronting for me. But that's obviously a helpful application that he's found. He's not talking about writing a book specifically. So, maybe there's a little bit of a caveat there, but yeah.
I would say, I think that is honestly a bit bit of a risk to us as thinking partners. I think there's still a space for both. There will be people who prefer to work with a human than a machine. Where I think probably that won't work in the book space is that, one of our values is we see the wood and the trees, because when you're working on books, you've got to be able to keep the big picture as well as all the little details in mind at the same time. And I think it would be probably, unless you're feeding all of your content into it, probably a bit tricky to keep both of those in mind. So I think that's probably where I don't feel like it's too much of a risk right now. But again, like all these things could be a risk. But I think that's a good point. Like you can use it to get other perspectives, especially if you're putting your thinking into it.
I think there's a slight difference in how AI is going to work best for you depending on how you write. And I know many of our clients, some of them are writers and they're writing blogs all the time and they know how they write. Others might not have opened a Word document in 10 years. So, but I know even on our team, like Dave, I know you're the draft. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. Alarm just went off here. I know you're a big fan of the ugly draft. So you get a bunch of words on a page, you get your ideas out, and then you go up and tidy them all. And the real thinking and development happens in that editing stage. I'm sort of the opposite. I tend to do a lot of note taking and thinking and mixing around with a plan. And then once I actually start writing, I usually don't actually do big picture changes after that. And so I wonder if AI operates slightly differently to fill in the gap that you struggle with. I think I struggle with challenging the writing once it's on a page. So that's where AI would be helpful to me. Dave, if you're the opposite, if it's like I just need something to play with, then maybe AI is actually better to generate for you. So maybe it's also very individual in what is the big hurdle for you? What's the thing that's getting in the way? And could AI plug that gap for you so that you can do what you're actually good at?
Again, I think it probably reflects very much like the outsourcing kind of relationship that we seem to be floating around, which is, yeah, absolutely. I will say, generally speaking, as a writer, it tends to be, once I get the first sentence right, I'm on a roll. But I love an ugly draft. I need to do more ugly drafts. But being able to go, cool, I've got something on the page I can edit is an enormous relief. Because a blank page is terrifying. But some protein on the page can at least, you can start working with that and turning it into something delicious. But you're right. I think if your skill, for instance, is not in editing your ideas, then look somewhere for editing support. If your skill is in struggling to get your ideas into something on the page, potentially look at there. But again, I think it kind of comes back to, do you want to develop your skills in that other area, or are you happy to not develop those skills? And I think that's where, for me, certainly with what we do, I want to be a better writer. I want to improve my skills in these regards. So I'm less likely to lean on that. At the same time, if there's I would say, generally speaking, accounts are not my strength. So I ask someone else to do that because I know that they're going to do a really good job without me having to do it poorly. We touched on this actually in the earlier days of Intelligent Inc. It was like, I suggested, why don't I learn how to do some website developing stuff? And we could add that to our suite of offerings. And the answer was, well, no. Just pay someone else who can do a better job and you can focus on doing the thing you do well. I follow that advice quite rigorously. I've not developed websites for anyone.
I think where it's maybe helpful in the writing, it comes back to what you were saying about a blank page, Dave, is I would argue that very few of our clients, if any, can't think of any off the top of my head, need to or are starting writing a book from a blank page. And I think maybe, have not used it for this, but the thought experiment, maybe where AI might be able to help is collating some of the stuff, or I don't know, smushing around some of the stuff that you've already got that exists, so that you're not starting from a blank. But, I've said to people before, you might already have 30,000 words of your book and you don't think you've started writing it yet, because actually once you've put the energy, which we've agreed should be in, putting the energy into the planning piece, it's then about what do you have that already exists. Most of the kind of people we work with, they've written blogs, they've written LinkedIn posts, they might have case studies for their business or the work that they do. Maybe they deliver speaking, like speeches, they facilitate, they've got tools or frameworks that they rely on in the delivery of their work. All of that is already content. So
I agree, but
know AI well enough to, I'll admit, to know how it might help with that, but that's maybe an assumption I'm making, is that possibly it could there. It's not generating writing for you, but it might make taking all of that stuff that you know already exists and turning it into something that's a more helpful start. Could it do that?
probably is the answer. If you asked,
that was going to be my suggestion, to be honest, is I don't think that when it comes to a book, you should be using AI for your first draft in terms of, here's my topic, give me some content for it, because that's what gives us, the example that Elsa used earlier. I don't think that you should use AI to create your first draft out of nothing. But if you have a huge amount of content already, whether that is blogs, newsletters, LinkedIn posts, case studies, podcasts, I think if you give it the plan, all of the thinking that you've done up front, and then you say, okay, here's all of my content, can you please pull whatever is relevant from those into the right sections, which hopefully if you give it a good enough plan, it'll see what it needs in each section, then that gives you a starting point. That to me is probably the best use of AI, because it actually reflects, we put in the Better Book Project when we created the course. This is the stage after the planning where you pull together all of your existing content, and it's a really time consuming process, and it probably still will take a little bit of time to find that all and put it all into AI, but it will certainly take you less time to use that tool in that way. So I think to me that's a really good use of the technology, is to take what you've already got and put that into the plan and the structure that you've already decided and thought about.
Okay, what's the next stage on our matrix?
Well, what else is in the writing stage? Because is there anything else that we would consider in there, or are we going to consider all the referencing and all that sort of stuff under editing?
Probably, I would. I don't think it's a writer's chief concern on the way. Would you argue that, Elsa? You look like you would.
I will say,
I'm always a fan. I'm always a fan of doing your referencing as you go. I think it's way easier, but I think that's a different conversation. I think AI or not, it's way easier than people think it's going to be, and it's really just a task and a process side of things. So I don't necessarily think AI makes a huge difference in how you approach that.
I mean, there are plenty of referencing tools as well, which make the job easier for you. They don't have to be generative AI by any stretch. Zotero is one that I use during my studies, and it's powerful and reliable and open source and lovely. I do want to touch briefly on something that we talked about, which was about communicating your ideas and being a better writer, because in order to communicate those ideas effectively, you need to know how to construct a sentence well and how to choose the word that's going to be the most effective, and even down to things like, when is it appropriate to use words that end with ing, your gerunds as they're called, or you use the slightly crunchier, shorter version of the verb, wake versus waking. It's really small stuff, but that has a massive impact on how well you communicate your ideas. Now, I know that you can just say, well, make this text punchier, and it will tighten it up somehow. But understanding how it has done that hopefully means that you won't need to rely on those tools in the future. I will still defend the personal and professional growth that happens when you do engage with these tools well and intelligently. But I think just going, look, make this writing better is not enough.
Someone doesn't have to know what better is by your standards, unless you've trained in a map.
Well, just as you would go and make a brief to any external writer, you'd say, well, look, I want this to be a bit punchy and something's not quite right about this. It sags in the middle. What can we do about it?
I agree, but or and.
Don't agree if you don't agree.
I agree in concept of like it's not enough to just say make this writing better. What I don't entirely agree with is that I think you come from a perspective, Dave, of caring really, really deeply about the writing. Like really deeply, you are a writer, like that's who you are. You care about have they used the right word here or the right form of the word. I genuinely couldn't care less. All I care about is, do I understand that idea? Does that idea appeal to me or to whoever the audience is meant to be? Yes or no? Like, does that achieve the outcome that it's trying to achieve? Like, for me, I care about the communication over the writing or the choice of words. And while obviously we know that language is really powerful and the words that you choose are really powerful, I don't think that like the vast majority of the people that we work with care about understanding the difference between when you use an ing word or, I think all that they care about is like, actually, I'm trying to get a point across. Does this get the point across? And while I think they learn some of that just by doing and testing it out and, they start to see all those things, I don't know that I could say for sure, oh, this is why that worked. All I know is that I've done enough of them to know that's what works. Like, if I say it this way, that's what's going to get
some of us a bit more gut. And I'm reminded of my, obviously when I was younger, I lived at home with my brother, and I quite liked to correct his grammar or word choice at times. And his retort over and over was, Chris, did I communicate meaning?
I've heard your husband say the same thing.
Then I was effective. Like, to him that was all that mattered.
Yes.
You got what I was trying to say, therefore, leave it.
Yes. If what we are trying to achieve is communicating ideas and transferring an idea that I have in my mind into your minds, then being able to do that with the fewest blocks, with the most ease, so that we share a thought as closely as possible, then how you go about that is really important. And I'm not taking this from a grammarian perspective of going, well, absolutely not. This is when you should use who and whom. The writing that we should do would be best when it reflects the voice that's going to communicate to the people that we're talking to. But when you understand how and why that works, you can take that learning further. So I agree with you, Verity. And I think you're probably right. The people who we work with probably don't particularly care about subject, object, verb arrangements. But when they begin to see that in themselves, they then can go further. They, strangely enough, need us less. And it makes how they get their message out there better. And I think that, to me, is part of the end, is where they can become so good, they don't need us anymore. They still like to work with us, but they don't need us.
I'm going to wrap us up there because we are running out of time, and I know that a couple of us have to go to meetings. I think what we're going to need is another session to finish this matrix, because we definitely have not finished that yet. And so I think that we could do another discussion. So if you're listening and you stick with this long, first of all, well done. You got a little taste into what our discussions are like, and you've also gotten some insight into the fact that whenever we book a meeting for an hour, it very rarely only lasts an hour. So I would like to thank you guys for agreeing to put this on camera and on the podcast, because it's the first time that we've forced you guys to be part of it, but we wouldn't have forced you if you didn't want to. You have been listening to Intelligent Think with Verity Craft and Christina Wedgwood, brought to you by Intelligent Think. Thank you to Jeff on for our theme music. Thanks to Dave and Elsa for joining us on this episode, and thank you to you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends, and leave us a review. Here's to better thinking together.